Hello everyone and welcome to A Word to the Wise. It is quite a fact that students find interest and joy in dealing with some of the subjects. However, sadly, they lack it in dealing with others. It has been the case for literature ever since the history of learning and even teaching, because some of the teachers from other branches, they tend to not like literature, which is quite sad. If you happen to be in the second category, this video is totally for you, as it might enable you to see literature in other ways, and that being said, even reading the newspapers is not going to be the same anymore. Without any further ado, let's get started. Mankind had always found the urge to write and take down whatever they had in mind, having the environment as a one factor to influence it. On that basis, plenty of works and literary productions have been categorized and classified into movements, all governed by the style, the format, and even the content. In today's video, we will see some of the categories or the movements of the literary works. The first movement we see today is romanticism, which flourished in Europe in the 18th century. Romanticism has as an interest environment and the individual expression. Of course, the use of the environment has no link to rationalism. They use elements to symbolize and make imagery of them, to express themselves, of course. We have as an example the one sample that you have seen in the third year, which is the poem of the poet Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote the poem that you saw, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. The following movement came in the 19th century as a reaction to the first movement. This second movement, which is realism, came to represent faithfully the reality. Some of the authors, of course, opposed the fancy romanticism, and so they opted for depicting reality and cut to the chase and speak about the drama of the broken cup. This movement coincided events like civil wars, like revolutionary industries, etc. So topics like the working class, poverty had been a theme in many of the literary works. This movement also fostered the aspect of regionalism, in which we find the traveling literature. So authors spoke about other locals and other places to reinforce their works. We have, for example, authors like Balzac and James Henry. The following movement, which is naturalism, overlapped at the same time with the development of the previous movement, which is realism. Naturalism sought to attach characters and subjects represented in literary works like novels, like poems, etc., and apply scientific principle of objectivity. That is to say, this movement aims to look at the essence of character. Naturalism, consequently, is a rather philosophical movement influenced by existentialism and social determinism, etc. Some of the authors in this movement combined the two previous movements, romanticism, which is the depiction with imageries and symbolism, and realism by telling the everyday life experience to convey their content in the spectrum of the personal experience. The fourth movement appeared in the 20th century, and that is modernism. Modernism is a term that is super broad to represent expressions, thoughts, ideas, and writings that had complete separation from any chains that used to govern the previous writing. That is to say, literally broke free from any governmental aspects. Poets of the time of modernism witnessed the world wars, the first and the second. So yes, you guessed it, that has been a great theme of the modernist literary works. Quite a style developed also during this movement, which is the stream of consciousness. That is to say, a poet or an author of any sort literally streams his consciousness and expression into their works. What is special about modernism is that it did not seek to represent just a moment or an experience of the individual, but rather an international fact which made all people all around the world refer to many works at the same time. Probably a good example of the modernist movement is the poem A Rose to Emily by William Faulkner. The last movement we are going to see is the postmodernism. When modernism came, the disillusionment appeared and the detachment from any chain to literature was quite there. But it did not last, of course, as new innovations surfaced. That is to say, new literary techniques had been adopted by authors. So the fragmentation, especially of the language, characterized this movement, and new techniques were adopted by authors, like exaggerations, when irony becomes a parody, and we no longer can distinguish which is tragic from which is comic. So those were the movement we have in literature. They have written and delivered literary works. Now it's the time for you guys to get to judge and criticize those works. Yes, only because you do belong to the teacher's training school, you have to criticize the literary works you are going to be presented with. And even if you are just a student in another university, you get to criticize as well right after watching this video. The notion of the literary lenses. Imagine with me that you put on lenses through which you see the literary work that you have in hand. That's exactly what literary criticism is all about, is looking at the literary work that you have in a way that we are going to see right now. The first literary lens we are going to see is Marxism. And as the name denotes, this literary lens came with the advent of the Marxist school of thought, which is also known by the name socio-economic, because the characters and the whole literary work is going to be viewed through the economic and the social position of the characters depicted in the work. Karl Marx said it crystal clear: history of man is nothing but a series of clashes between the oppressed and the oppressor. That is to say, between the proletariat and the nobility. One thing to notice about this lens is that even in the same class, there might exist some sub-clashes, like amongst the nobility or amongst the proletariat. An example I would give about the Marxism lens, Shakespearean work Hamlet. At the very onset of the poem, we have the gods who say something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And if that depicts anything, it depicts the way the proletariat are viewing the nobility. Despite they are nobility, and still they are having something that is rotting. The second literary lens is feminism. Of course, as any production, this kind of discrimination is always present in literature, whether the authors realize it or not. But the misogyny or the phylogeny is always present in the works. What you are required to do is to detect the women in some literary works, whether they are depicted as Madonnas or as whores, literally saying. An example I would give of this is the Crucibles. But I will not illustrate any further because we will have a devoted video about this very poem, as you guys are going to see it in your next semester. And I hope with having the exam and watching this video, you will be more than able to detect how the women in the Crucible and the Salem village are depicted, and you will get to criticize by all means. There are plenty of other literary lenses out there, but in the teacher's training school you only are required with 2, maximum 3, depending on your teacher. Normally it is Marxism and feminism that you are going to analyze the literary works with, but in this video I'm going to add a last literary lens, which is the psychoanalytical, also known as the Freudian, after the Austrian neurologist and psychotherapist Freud. This lens particularly adopts the methods of reading employed by Freud. So yes, everything that authors write can imply stuff about them. Any unconscious desires, any childhood traumas, any unresolved emotions, ambivalence, etc., all could be traceable within the behaviors of the characters depicted in the literary work of a certain author. And in here you will be detecting how this is depicted in his work, whether by the use of symbolism. Some of the authors tend to use everything that is dark and gothic, or by the use of condensation, as in joining plenty of images and persons and actions into one image, perhaps because the author is just not moving on with what's happened with them. Maybe. Or lastly, by the use of displacement, speaking of some other incident to represent the authors. I would give an example of Jesus' crucifixion that everybody now and then speaks about and exemplifies with, just to represent some certain sacrifice they have gone through themselves. So this has been all about this video. I hope you liked the content of it. If you did, do not forget to leave me a comment down there below so that I would benefit obviously from your comments and your feedback. And of course, if you have any suggestions of future videos, please do share. Thank you so much and see you next time.